So, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Vedanta Series Question and Answer session. We start off with our normal prayer for teacher and student. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavai Tejasvinavaditam Astu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us both. May we work together with great energy. May we have our minds illumined by our studies. May we not unnecessarily quarrel with each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. And so with that, I welcome any questions that you may have. And as usual, I'll mute my microphone so you can formulate any question. And we can see if we can develop an answer for it. There are no questions? You're all thoroughly illumined. So I have a question for you, and you're free to answer. What is the definition of spiritual life? What is the definition of spiritual life? And anybody is sorry?
Truth, connection to the truth, to what it is.
Yes, okay. Well, that's
fundamental
yes.
practices.
Yes, this would be the objective. But what is the process? When we
what do you mean in process? Is that the stages?
Yes, so supposing you want to climb a mountain, then you don't just appear at the top, you have to get to the top, the merits of getting to the top. But what is the process? If you compare it to mountain climbing, then the process will be that you steer clear from the mountain in the beginning. You start with gradual training, yes? But even training, you can put in a different way. So what is the spiritual process?
I could say is insight. It starts from the inside, from oneself. I mean, you can study it, but most of the times you could just reach certain levels when you go in, because it's not external.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to answer in a slightly different way. All right.
Yes, Swami. I was thinking to ask you, what does it mean to be a spiritual seeker? Because question and answer are for spiritual seeker. But can you tell us, what is a spiritual seeker?
Yes.
And is it possible to have a spiritual life all your life long, or is it just a question for kings and like they say in the Vedas and so on, for like Swami Vivekananda said, is it for very busy people, or always my question, do you have to be very busy to be in the spiritual quest,
Okay, so these are good questions. So we have two things before us. What is the spiritual process? And in the beginning anyway, what is the spiritual seeker? And what are the qualities or attributes or positions necessary to be a spiritual seeker? Do you have to be somebody special? So the answer lies in a shift of our thinking. Our thinking starts off with an acknowledgement of this world, this environment, and we relate everything to this environment. This presents us with an opportunity to manifest our instinct. We'll use a biological term called instinct. What is instinct? Instinct is all the experience that we have had in all the lives that we have enjoyed, that we have connected with. And so that requires a shift of perspective. Let's take the biological perspective currently in vogue. We are born in a moment. We go on, we grow up. There are different phases in our life that we can clearly identify. There's a clear demarcation between childhood, teenagehood, maturity, adulthood, old age. And then we know at the end of the line, if we're lucky, then we have a good death. We don't want to think about that part, but that's the normal way that we perceive things. Now, it's no different really from any other animal, except they have not defined it in this way. They don't have the capacity, intellectual capacity, to put things into categories and assess what their condition is at any given time. So they're largely working on reaction, or what we call instinct. Now we have to understand instinct is really learnt behavior. This is the key to what we call reincarnation, theory of reincarnation, that we don't arrive suddenly and then accumulate all our experiences from there. We arrive with some experiences. And these experiences we call instinct. Let us take the last section of what I've just said, that is the death. Everybody, regardless of whether they are yogis, regardless of whether they are experienced in the intellectual principles of the Vedanta, that they know of the impermanence of life, they know the Vedas, they know the scripture, they have a teacher. Regardless of all of that, still the impulse to preserve life is there. You walk on a street, a car comes, you have the instinct to avoid it. You don't walk into it. So this instinct in yogic language is called samskaras. Samskara, memories, unconscious memories accumulated that result in an impulse, a reaction somewhere. And this presents us with an obstacle. An obstacle to what? An obstacle to the truth. So the first answer really was, what is spiritual? What is the spiritual process or spiritual life? And somebody said truth. That doesn't really give us a proper answer. It just tells us that's what we're looking for. And a spiritual seeker is looking for truth. Now we can use this word truth, but we have to understand it properly and give many variations. What does it mean? It means settlement. It means peace. It means freedom. When we have the truth about something, we have an absolute. The absolute provides us with a level of freedom. So we have to consider that our current condition is not just a natural condition, a compilation of all these experiences that are sitting there underneath in what we call the unconscious area, what we prefer to call the habit level. Not only are they sitting there, but if we want to progress and find out the truth, we have to deal with them. And we have to deal with them in such a way that the habit becomes changed. Change of habit in a positive way is what is called spiritual life. And so all of us want to do it. Ultimately, all of us want the end result. So in that sense, every single person You may see say maybe even every single atom is looking for its own freedom. Every single atom, therefore, is a spiritual seeker. If we shift our attitude away from the biological and come then to a more sophisticated understanding, let us say intellectual and cultural. There are many museums, there are many art places, galleries, and so on, that cater for the expressive part of humanity, the refinement part of humanity, that can see an inner beauty in something. Let us take the human form. From the times of the Greeks, and every culture has admired the human form and sculpted it and presented statues with it. And in the Renaissance period, in European history, there was an emphasis on this Renaissance, a revival of the classical art forms. So there's an appreciation within us like that other biological species do not have. Now we're moving away from biology, but is it still instinctual? Well, we must have within us, don't forget, every expression has to have its origin in the instinct, the samskaras, the accumulated experiences. And so there is a sense of inner beauty, an aesthetic sense within us that we want to express. Now we're getting closer to the truth. And so spiritual seekers are people who have said, let me now, through the senses anyway, let me not just see this world just as a raw survival environment where I eat and drink with great gusto and enjoy all kinds of sense pleasures. But a different kind of pleasure arises in the mind. A pleasure for art, for culture, for aesthetics, for beauty. And then we can then cultivate the eye of an artist, looking at a tree, looking at a pond, looking at water, looking at the sky, looking at clouds. We can maybe use an artist's eye or a poet's words and concepts to see how can we now replicate this in an expressive way so that it doesn't matter who our listener is, it doesn't matter who looks at our art, it doesn't matter if it's good or if it's bad in somebody else's eyes, but I'm expressing something within me that is of a higher, more sophisticated value than the raw biological aspect of me. And so that then becomes added experience more and more. And then that cultivates an inner eye that says there's an inner beauty in everything. Now we have gone to a more subtle stage of understanding and appreciation. And what are we doing at each one of these stages? We are leaving behind an obstacle. And so what is spiritual? The spiritual process? I will answer my own question. It is the removal of obstacles. That requires a shift of understanding that says, I'm not a creature created, fashioned, separate from a creator. Not at all. I feel one. I feel a part of the divine. I feel a part of the universe. I don't feel separate from nature. I feel somehow a connectedness, a mutual appreciation, and ultimately a oneness. So every time I move and remove an obstacle, as it were, or deal with an obstacle in a systematic, cultivated way called spiritual seeking, spiritual endeavor, what am I doing? I'm removing layers that obscure my vision. It's as if I have several tinted pieces of glass in front of my eyes, and I can only see the universe in this way. And the more I seek, the more divine grace flows toward me in a corresponding way and removes the obstacles. It's not exactly accurate to say I myself are removing the obstacles, not at all. First of all, the opportunity to remove the obstacles is presented. as part of growth, as part of evolution and unfolding. And every small effort on my part is matched by a flow of grace on the other side. That's the lion's share of it. That's the bulk of it. So how to induce this flow more and more and more? I have to remove the obstacles more and more and more. And the more I do that, the more opening, the more the eye opens, the more these obscuring layers get removed. And ultimately, I see that truth is of a relative kind. On the one side, is like an unsighted person whose sight gets restored bit by bit, bit by bit. Somebody, for example, with a cataract in the eye, and then all of a sudden, everything is seen differently. Or a person who doesn't know they require spectacles. And then as the optician puts one glass there and tells you, please read these numbers or read these, the alphabet, then tells me or asks me, is it blurry? What is the clarity? Try this one. And oh, that's much clearer. Then the next one, oh, much clearer still, until you have the optimal vision. So on the one side, you're removing obstacles. On the other side, there's a revelation of truth through divine grace flowing. And so this is spiritual life. Do we require any speciality? Do we require to be a rishi, a king? Rishis gain their status by this very process, by this internal inquiry, by elevating the inner capacity that we have. If we have as our source, as our fundamental essence, tremendous beauty and blissful nature, then as we open up more and more, it becomes expressed more and more. And the pleasure of an art form, the pleasure of indulging in aesthetics, then takes an inner turn. And we can see the inner joys of it. We don't have to look toward the outside. We can move consciousness more and more toward the inside. Inside means not just inside you, but inside all the things that we see and experience through the senses take on an extra dimension, a spirituality, a divinity, until there's a realization, wherever I look, up, down, left, right, is all that same spirit. Spiritual life, therefore, is normal life. All life is spiritual life. As long as we get closer to the understanding that what looks like material life is actually just an expression of the spirit through the senses. What looks like pleasure in art and culture is all this which is understood through the expression and revelation of an inner beauty that I have an inner inherent or an innate aesthetic sense, and that can be used as something that leads me more and more inwardly. So we start off as a spiritual seeker by pushed into a painful situation, something that we want to, something that impinges on our instinct. Having experienced so many deaths and clinging to this life, we instinctively avoid death and danger. Now, Swami Vivekananda, in his Raja Yoga, puts it in a beautiful way. He makes a commentary on these various obstacles, or kleshas as they are called. It's worthwhile reading these commentaries to understand what are these basic obstacles and how will we remove them. We start off with the mother of all obstacles, the primary darkness, the primary ignorance. What is ignorance by definition? What is this first primary obstacle? And all the other obstacles are subsidiaries of this one. It is this ignorance this lack of knowledge. What was described in the previous answer as truth? Yes. Truth means we have found everything that is truthful, that is truth itself. It's an absolute value. You can't even say value except for convenience. You can say it's an absolute. Absolute means it's absolutely full. There are no dimensions to it. It's infinite. Ignorance is, by definition, taking the non-eternal, the impure, the tarnished. Everything that has a variation is an impurity. If we take an absolute, then as soon as there's a variation in it, it becomes impure. It is no longer an absolute. The painful, because life intrinsically is painful. It sounds pessimistic to say it, but all these yoga philosophies and Buddhist philosophies are built on this acknowledgement that life is intrinsically painful. And the fact that we don't really register it in this way is really a result of this ignorance. The painful and the non-self for the eternal, the pure, the happy, and the internal self, what is called Atman, respectively. The commentary is like this, that Vivekananda gives. All the different sorts of impressions have one source, ignorance. We have first to learn what ignorance is. All of us think, I am the body and not the self. The pure, the effulgent, the ever blissful. That is ignorance. We think of a man and see man as body. This is the great delusion. This is our first obstacle. How does it express itself? It expresses itself in a certain identity that is called egoism, which is the next obstacle. Egoism, what is it? It is the identification of the seer, the internal seer, with the instrument of seeing, and also with what it sees, the objects. Swami Vivekananda gives this commentary. The seer is really the pure self, the pure one, the ever holy, the infinite, the immortal. This is the self of man. And what are the instruments? There's really the primary instrument that we have. We have to go to the psychology that is contained in the yoga philosophy and comes from Sankhya. Sankhya psychology. When you do the Enneagram, I put it that the Enneagram actually is Sankhya psychology, and the essence of truth is Vedanta. And when you understand both of these things, then you have a way of being a spiritual seeker. We have to see that the instrument, primary instrument that we have, it is what is called mind stuff. Chitta is the language that is being used. The buddhi, or determinative faculty, the manas, the mind, and the indriyas, or sense organs. These are the instruments for that person to see the external world. And the identification of the self with the instruments is what is called the ignorance of egoism. We think it's the eyes that see. No. You can be sleeping and somebody can open the eyelids, the eyeball will stare out at you, it doesn't see anything. You can be fast asleep and the noise is there in the distance of something and you will not hear it. Attention is required, an aspect, an expression of a mind stuff, a kind of instrumental consciousness has to be there. And it is this primary thing that variegates into different instrumental faculties. What are these faculties? It starts with the most subtle, but we can start the other way around, that it is the indriyas, the senses, are internal to us, part of this chitta, this mind stuff. And then there is the registration aspect. We can call it mind, it's called manas. And then the buddhi, the determinative faculty. These are all instrumental, and along with that is an identification of the self with the instruments. That is called egoism. We say, I am the mind. I am thought, I am angry, or I am happy. See the identification with a wave. And a wave is impermanent. See the delusion coming from our ignorance. How can we be angry and how can we hate? We should identify ourselves with the self that cannot change. If it is unchangeable, how can it be one moment happy, one moment unhappy? It is formless, infinite, omnipresent, and yet you ask somebody, how are you today? Oh, I'm not well. I am well. I feel joyful. I feel unhappy. I feel melancholic. I feel on top of the world. I feel sunny. I feel rainy. I feel blue. I feel intensely joyful because of some circumstances happen in my life. The next moment, some other circumstance happens, and I don't feel so happy. See how shifting this is. But the self can never change and never shift. It is formless, infinite. It is omnipresent. That means it's not imprisoned inside a cage. It is full, always. Therefore, we cannot say, if I'm a spiritual seeker, is there something absent in me that I need to look for? Is there some special condition that I have to be born in, such as a monk or a king or somebody who is in some way suited to spiritual seeking? We're all thirsting for an ultimate. We're all looking for freedom. We all want to express it in this way. But we are subject to these obstacles. Remove the obstacles, and the seeking becomes less. And what is the primary mechanism? Primary mechanism is exercising thought. Ask and you shall receive. Seek and you will find. In other words, it's not seeking and you won't find. It's not asking and you won't receive. You will receive it. You will get it. A movement from yourself, that is from your chitta, a movement that is directed in a systematic way, constantly, wave after wave after wave with resolve, will result in something positive. There are only two rules that we need to apply in terms of this, therefore. Two golden rules that you could think of. Don't say it's my mind. It's God's mind. Clean it out. How do you do it? Decorate it. Prayer and meditation are the means for doing this. Secondly, don't think it's your body. It's not your body. It's given to you. It's God's temple made by Him. Don't say I'm eating. Say I'm feeding God's temple. Don't say I'm bathing. Say I'm cleaning God's temple. You'll not give much importance to illness and disease if you do this, but just to keeping the Lord's temple clean. Why does God keep this body going, digesting food, allowing us to wake up, start silly thinking in the morning? He must have thought He has a purpose for it. Find out what that purpose is. This will go for maturity. This is called spiritual seeking. Think that every cell is a branch office of the mind, this chitta, and change your thought current. If you do that, all the cells will vibrate. You trust in this divine providence called God. Love one's neighbor, seek truth and righteousness, always do that. Find a blessing to count every day. Constantly it's there. If you can put one good harmonizing thought in every day, not only about what happened to you, but also about what happened to your associate, your colleague, your neighbor. After 1 year, all your disease will be knocked out. And disease also is an obstacle. Appreciating someone's success is much better than criticizing or criticizing of yourself or of others also. Don't try to imitate somebody else. Find your own way. Make your own ladder. Don't use my broken ladder. Somebody else's lifestyle is what suits them. You develop your own way, your own style of seeking. Always plan something new. You see, the opposite of doing that is stagnation. What do you call, Thomas? Stagnation. If you have a job, make sure that within the job, you're planning something new, you're learning something new, you're involved in a new, different activity, insert some enthusiastic energy into it. You see, if I feel dull 2 to 3 hours a day, my stomach will be dull and won't digest anything. And then the elimination will not work, and everything else will become dull as a result. And instead of attractiveness and bodily harmony through your new thoughts, the body will become dull, it will become weak. So if you want to heal mentally and physically, mentally means also physically, then you can invoke a flow which is called divine grace, and you will be cured, and every person will be cured if you do that, if you make that flow happen. So anyway, continuing the Swami Vivekananda on this is my own commentary, but we come back to Swami Vivekananda. It is formless, it is infinite. What can affect it? This Atman. Nothing in the universe can produce an effect on it. Yet through ignorance, we identify ourselves with the mind stuff and think we feel pleasure or pain. And we have to assess within ourselves what individual obstacles will be there in our habit level. Supposing you feel that you lack strength. Patanjali Yoga Sutras are enormously practical. It's a science of religion. And there you'll find in that particular section on powers of siddhis some useful things and some things not so useful. Let's take something that is useful. If you want strength, then you do what is called samyam on an elephant. You ask somebody, what is the strongest animal you can think of? And they may say, oh, a lion or something, right? But I come from Africa and, much stronger than a lion. A lion will never attack an elephant. Now, Patanjali knew this and says, if you want strength, do samyam on an elephant, strength of an elephant. Then you'll become strong. And strength is a key thing that we need in spiritual seeking. Spiritual seeking is not for the weak. In fact, if you have the strength of body and mind, then you have actually everything really that is necessary, because the divine grace will flow in your direction toward you and sort everything else out. Like angels going ahead, making the crooked paths straight. So Patanjali puts this, what is samyama? Samyama means, let us visualize an elephant. Let us visualize the strength. Let us catch the quality of this elephant. And this concentration will lead me to understand what are the intrinsic subtle parts that together, combined, make what we call an elephant. And we'll find there are all combinations of divine glories and graces. And then you go further, and there you see this omnipotent entity that is expressing itself in this way. Identifying with this, you cannot help but feel strong. Now, this was only a mere headline suggestion. Supposing you want leadership qualities, sit down and you can have a conversation. I think it was the great positive thinker Napoleon Hill who recommended. Have a conversation in your own mind, in your imagination, with Napoleon, say. Supposing you admire Napoleon or Beethoven or any of these people who have a strong character, or Vivekananda himself. Now, supposing you're an artist and you have an artistic eye, supposing you sit down and make a portrait of Vivekananda or Beethoven or Napoleon, all strong characters, and then you ask, please talk to me, ask some questions. When you wrote this commentary, Swamiji, what did you have in mind? What was your inner feeling? Please express it to me so that I can catch not just words. Words just can flow through intellect and have no absorptive power. But let me absorb the meaning of what you're saying in your words. Let it thrill in every cell of my body and see what happens. Like this, you have some tea, sit down and have some tea with Swami Vivekananda or Napoleon or Beethoven or any of the great characters, anybody you can admire for their qualities, and see what happens. So samyama means you start off with concentration, then it leads you in to meditation, and ultimately to a position of samadhi. That means where you unify with the very quality that you're meditating on. Holding on to that, you'll see a transformation in every single part of the body and the mind. And you can go forward. It means there are infinite possibilities. We assess, what do we lack? What is our main obstacle as an individual? What is my particular type of egoistic position that I have? What is stopping me in this realm? Not just as a headline, but in a detailed way, in my individuality, in terms of my own personal habit level or samskaras, and bring that out. It is not a kind of introspection, a psychological introspection, that helps me to find a certain obstacle and not deal with it. This can be a psychological method which doesn't really help. It actually deepens a wound or a painful experience inside. No, not that. What you're doing is you're putting something new, something positive in. You have the capacity to do it. You have infinite power within you. Just express it, because at the very source is this Atman. So, yet through ignorance, says Swami Vivekananda, we identify ourselves with the mind stuff and think we feel pleasure or pain. Then he goes on, the next klesha, the next obstacle, coming directly from egoism is attachment. Now, very, very often people think they know what they mean by attachment, but let's define it. Attachment is that which dwells on pleasure. You cannot be attached to something that is not pleasurable. And Vivekananda acknowledges this, and he says, we find pleasure in certain things, and the mind, like a current, flows toward them. And this following the pleasure center, as it were, is what is called attachment. Attachment, therefore, is following the pleasure center. We are never attached where we don't find pleasure. We find pleasure in very, very queer things, he says. But the principle remains. Wherever we find pleasure, there we are attached. Then what about aversion, the next klesha? When we're attached to something moving in one direction, we're pulling away from something in the opposite direction. Aversion is that which dwells on pain. That which gives us pain, we immediately seek to get away from. But we can face it, isn't it? If we understand we're in control, if we understand that we have a base that can observe, if we understand we are the seer, not mixed up with the object or instrument of seeing, then we can observe these things in a systematic way. We can see how Buddhist meditation works in this way. Watching the mind become attached to this, in other words, moving toward pleasure, and avoiding something else, painful experience. But watching these, pleasure and pain together, seeing how these things arise in the mind and come and go like waves. immediately we can get a sense of proportion that says, I am that stable one, the seer that doesn't move with the one, doesn't diminish with the other, watches the traffic, sees the various trains like standing on a platform, coming and going. And I didn't come with the first one, and I'm not going with the last one. We don't suppress anything. We're just observing and stating a fact. It's an obstacle. Flowing through its own nature and established even in the learned, is the clinging to life, the last obstacle, the most fundamental crude obstacle, which provides us with a sense of survival where when we are walking in traffic, we immediately don't wish to get run down by a car. I'm not suggesting that if you overcome this obstacle, you'll stand in the way of every car. That's not the point. This clinging to life, says Swami Vivekananda, you see manifest in every animal. Upon it, many attempts have been made to build the theory of a future life because mankind, it means, are so fond of life that they desire a future life also. And in religion, this comes out as a belief in a heaven, a post-mortem condition. Of course, it goes without saying that this argument is without much value, but the most curious part of it is that in Western countries, the idea that this clinging to life indicates a possibility of future life applies only to mankind or men, but does not include animals. In India, this clinging to life has been one of the arguments to prove past experience. If somebody debates and says, I don't believe in this reincarnation, or this transmigration, as I prefer to call it, then this is one of the evidences that can be produced. Past experience and existence come out. For instance, says Swami Vivekananda, if it be true that all our knowledge has come from experience, if you take that as a primary axiom, then it's sure that that which we never experienced, we cannot imagine or understand. They're all based on experience. You can't imagine or understand anything that you have not experienced. As soon as chickens are hatched, they begin to pick up food. Many times it has been seen where ducks have been hatched by hens, that as soon as they come out of the eggs, they flew to the water. And the mother thought they would be drowned. How can a chicken come and swim in the water? Not possible. If experience be the only source of knowledge, where did these chickens learn to pick up food, or the ducklings, that the water was their natural element? If you say it's instinct, it means nothing. It is simply giving a word, but it's not an explanation. What is this instinct? We have many instincts in ourselves. For instance, and he's talking to an audience, says, most of you ladies play the piano. He's talking in Western society in the 19th century to cultured women in America. And remember, when you first learned how carefully you had to put your fingers on the black and the white keys, one after the other. But now, after long years of practice, you can talk with your friends while your fingers play mechanically. You can apply this example to driving a car or playing any other kind of musical instrument or anything that you require some dexterity for. It has become instinct. Today, you find young children being able to operate mobile phones, hardly even attending to it, just the fingers walking across it. So with every work we do, says Swami Vivekananda, by practice it becomes instinct, it becomes automatic. We can say in my language, it settles on the habit level. But so far as we know, all the cases which we now regard as automatic are degenerated reason. In other words, we start off by deliberately, strategically engaging in a certain action in the conscious mind where reason happens. And because of repetition, it becomes settled in the habit level. In the language of the yogi, instinct is involved reason. discrimination becomes involved and gets to be automatic samskaras. We learn a strategy. Even a bacteria has had to learn a strategy by adapting to environmental conditions. I used to do some research on microorganisms, and if you want to change a whole population, an inoculum of bacteria in the laboratory, gradually introduce some changes, and the whole bacterial population will adapt because of this clinging to life or the survivalist instinct which is there. Therefore, it is perfectly logical, continues Swami Vivekananda, to think that all we call instinct in this world is simply involved reason, as reason cannot come without experience. All instinct is therefore the result of past experience. Chickens fear the hawk and ducklings love the water. These are both results of their past experience. You may say it's built into their genes. You can express it in that language, but it doesn't really solve the problem of the origin of it. Then the question is whether the experience belongs to a particular soul or to the body, simply whether this experience which comes to the duck is the duck's forefather's experience, that is genetic. Even in his day, he was thinking along the lines of genetics. Modern scientific men, says Vivekananda, hold that it belongs to the body. What is that? That is this genetic aspect. It's just genetics. But the yogis, he's not saying they're wrong. He's simply putting this language, the yogis, the wonderful way of expressing it in an objective way. The yogis hold that it is the experience of the mind transmitted through the body. This is called the theory of reincarnation. We have seen that all our knowledge, whether we call it perception or reason or instinct, must come through that one channel called experience. And all that we now call instinct is a result of past experience, degenerated into instinct. And that instinct regenerates into reason again. The instinct regenerates into reason again. In other words, it can come up and then we can deal with it in a systematic and objective way again. So, on throughout the universe, and upon this has been built one of the chief arguments for reincarnation he says in India, but in the East, because all the Eastern systems have this system. And not only that, but we can't say Christianity in its origin is not Eastern either. Jesus, as Swami Vivekananda himself points out in his lectures on Christ the Messenger, points out that this Jesus is from the East, with scenes of camels and deserts and palm trees and women drawing water from wells and flowing dress suitable for this Near Eastern climate. And you can't say that Jesus did not believe in this when a man is presented blind from birth, and the question that is being asked to him, was this person whose blindness, was it caused by him, that is his own past experience, or genetically was it from his parents, the sin of his parents, or his own sin is how it's expressed. And Jesus answers the question. Therefore, it was acknowledged thoroughly in that time that this was a natural understanding. The recurring experiences of various fears in course of time produce this clinging to life. Fear is the mother of all, fear of death is the mother of all fears. That is why the child is instinctively afraid, because the past experience of pain is there in it. Even if you take a newborn baby and just suddenly make a movement like this, a downward movement, it'll cling. It knows. Even in the most learned men, that is what Patanjali is saying as well, and he's repeating it, who know that this body will go and who say, never mind, we've had hundreds of bodies, the soul cannot die. Despite that, even in them, with all their intellectual convictions, we still find this clinging on to life. Why is this clinging to life? We have seen that it has become instinctive. In the psychological language of the yogis, it has become a samskara, an underlying impression. In a library, an unconscious library of the mind, if you will, the samskaras, fine and hidden, are sleeping in the chitta. All this past experience of death, all that which we call instinct, in experience becomes subconscious. It lives in the chitta, and it is not inactive, but is working underneath. The chitta vrittis, the mind waves, which are gross, appearing as flowers and trees and animals and bodies and tables and chairs. We can appreciate and feel they can be more easily controlled. But what about the finer instincts? This is where the question of spiritual seeking is coming in. How can they be controlled? When I am angry, my whole mind becomes a huge wave of anger. I feel it, see it, handle it, can easily manipulate it, can fight with it. But I shall not succeed perfectly in the fight until I can get down below to its causes, that is the samskaras. A man says something very harsh to me, I begin to feel that I am getting heated, and he goes on till I am perfectly angry and forget myself, identify myself with anger, or this wave of anger. When he first began to abuse me, I thought, I'm going to be angry. Anger was one thing, I was another. But when I became angry, I was anger. These feelings have to be controlled in the germ, the root, in their fine forms, before even we have become conscious that they are acting on us. What is the relevance in terms of the questions? This is the process of spiritual seeking. It is a psychological process. It is not the process that is allocated to people of certain temperaments or certain occupations. With the vast majority of mankind, the fine states of these passions are not even known. They just allow this anger to come. Road rage is an example. The states in which they emerge from subconsciousness. When a bubble is rising from the bottom of the lake, we don't see it, not even when it has nearly come to the surface. It is only when it bursts and makes a ripple that we know it's there. We shall only be successful, and here's the key, in grappling with the waves, when we can get hold of them in their fine causes. And until you can get hold of them and subdue them before they become gross, there's no hope of conquering any passion perfectly. To control our passions, we have to control them at their very roots. We have observed them when they come up. Then alone shall we be able to burn out their very seeds. As fried seeds thrown into the ground will never come up again, so these passions will never arise. So how do we do it? We take these subtle impressions and we resolve them into their causal state. And we resolve that into its causal state. And the primary means, of course, is this meditation. And this meditation is common to every single system. So spiritual seeker must not only revalue things in the world, be able to observe these things coming up, be able to handle them in situ, but having done that, not allow them to arise where we have an opportunity to go in deeper in terms of prayer, in terms of meditation, and in terms of internal discovery. And so this is the process of spiritual seeking. And this is the process of being a spiritual seeker. And this is the progressive process that we call spirituality. I hope that is useful to you all.
Swami, I have a question.
Yes.
In the whole concept of spiritual seekers, I do understand. Well, it is, or in other way, it is understandable that is being conscious of the whole world that surrounds us, or universe that surrounds us. And I had this. There was a reflection that came. It's all about this ethnocentricity that is going on with the world. It's always ethnocentric, and it's what it is. It's what it is. So this is always this thing. I noticed this, unfortunately, the source of major conflicts, this ethnocentrism. I know we have already discussed long and large with it, but I realize that's the thing. That's and ethnocentrics comes as well from the ego, identification with one race or one culture, right?
Yes. You see that's it. It's not only ethnocentricity. You see, if you take, for example, current conflict in Eastern Europe, it's not ethnocentricity necessarily. It might be perceived like that. It's more about land. It's more about power. It's more about asserting your stake in land on an earth, on a planet that really has no overall significance in the overall cosmology, but has significance to us, of course, and generations beyond us. And we can carelessly think of this earth as just a material thing that we can handle in whatever way we like. There are many different problems, but all are driven from egocentricity. Egocentricity is driven from ignorance. How to deal with the ignorance? The only antidote is knowledge. All of us have to be a spiritual seeker in this way. I don't think there's much merit, though, in dwelling on these things. When we sit down and meditate, we can meditate, of course, on everything that arises from the BBC and all the problems that the media are producing. That we could do if we like. What effect will that have on the situation? What will it be? The same effect that it has on the human body. Your thought is taken up by every material thing, and the human body is a magnetic field that radiates and attracts. If you contemplate on the difficulties of this world, all your digestion will be difficult. Your skin will erupt into difficult things. Your whole elimination system will be halted because of the preoccupation of, oh, the world is like this, the world is like that. Actually, if you take nature, if you take my thought today, you'll see it. Yeah, so I'll just repeat what I wrote today here now. See. Battered boats, rooftops fly, circling vortex winds pass by. Not that sins have made it so, good and bad, high and low. It's only nature's way. Staring out as droplets fly, pangs give rise to teary eye. There will be no friends today. Virus lockdowns, so they say, it's only nature's way. In lonely moments, young or old, laments can come if past is told. Melancholy tales of poorly me, unless balanced with some sanity. It is only nature's way. Those who offer roof and food, without a thought or gratitude, attentive listening on the phone to those abandoned and alone, it is only nature's way. In their sharing and compassion, find their humble sharing ration. Is privilege rare for them reserved? Beloved one can now be served, for it too is nature's way. And that last stanza, if you will, is the key to neutralizing all these other things. Nature's way we accept. We don't criticize it. And man's inhumanity to man and man's ignorance, we accept it. It is part and parcel of it. But for us, what will we do? We think in a different way. That also is nature's way. The opportunity for us to think differently is also nature's way. So we have to control nature, internal and external, both. This is a quotation from Swami Vivekananda's famous, oft-quoted statement, even contained in this Raja Yoga. But each soul is potentially divine, and the goal is to manifest this from within, thus controlling nature, external and internal. That we have to do. Can we control all these factors? Yes. But we have to learn to control our own minds first. Then we can address these things in the world. You see, the mind is like a bee. It can be like a bee or a fly. A bee is quite selective. It will land on flowers. A fly will land on anything. It will fly. It will land on manure and the flower and your hand and your eyes. You see. So the mind is like that. We can make it refined, and then our own peace is not disturbed. And the peace of others is restored. Then we can take this ego and make it an open channel for divine grace to flow everywhere. If I have to think of all the difficulties in the world, I'll be half mad, and so will you. Why do you think of these things? Just think of God's glory, divine glory flowing through all these manifested areas. And when we do that, when we tune into a flowing, divine, loving grace that has inherent beauty and goodness and truth within it, the world shifts in that direction as well. This is our formula. This is a formula of saints who just simply blessed and never blamed. Forgive them, they know not what they're doing. This is Jesus' language on the cross. So we leave it like that. We've now exceeded our time a little bit. So thank you. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Thanks.
Thank you, Swami.
Thank you,
Thank you, Swami.
Swami, would you
Thank
mind
you very much.
1 second?
Merci beaucoup, Swami.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Swami. Thank you for the feedback.
Oh.